Let me rerun this command again. So again, if I give the same name, like the same name I'm actually giving, right? So it will override the image. So now you can actually see this is actually cached, like apt get update and nginx are cached, but this one is actually failing the Redis server. So again, the same problem. It is asking for do you want to continue or not? I'll just provide -y option by default, yes. So this is actually done, and let's see the history of this particular image. So you can actually see this Redis. So it is actually built like almost 6 seconds back, right? Now, if I add like another step, um, so I want to copy a specific file on from this folder to this folder, like which so I want to copy the startup.sh. Let's say, okay, copy. Uh, want to copy it to the current location. Like, okay. Now again, let me run this command. So this time, like even this is actually cached, like the Redis server. And if we see the history of this particular history again, so you can see this is actually built a minute ago. So it is not building it on the fly. And some of these images, like if you see, so layers, like they're actually built like almost 10 days back. Okay. So this is how like the caching actually works. Um, so for example, if I change this order, like, okay, so for example, if I'm changing this order, I wanted to copy, like I want to copy it first and then I'll do all the steps again. Like, okay. Now let's see how this actually behaves. Okay, so I'm just changing like this copy command, it used to be at the end. So now what I'm actually doing, so I'm just putting it at the top. So that is the only change like which I made. We'll do the Docker build again. So now you can actually see, so the copy command executed after that, like apt get install, apt update. So all these commands are re-executing, if you see. So the only change like which I made is, so this is the only change like which I made. Okay, so I just moved from this to this. So why is this happening? Like any idea? So you understood, right? So actually, like previously, like I used to have this step at the end, and then so I just moved this single step, like copy the file from my local directory into the image. So the startup.sh file. So I just moved this command only to the top, like remaining all commands, they are in the same place. But still, like if you see, so it is actually doing, it is not actually caching. So there is no cache, like almost except the first step, everything is actually rebuilt. Like it is actually executing these commands on the fly. And the reason for that is, so since I mentioned, right? So in the history, what actually happens? So initially, this is the first step. So once this first step is actually done, like it creates a layer out of this first step. Okay. So after that, like it takes this input from the first step and then it tries to apply this particular command, like apt get update onto this particular layer. Okay. So now the first layer is obviously changed, right? So you're applying this update command on a different layer, startup.sh, on a layer which contains this startup.sh file. So that is the reason why like it felt like, okay, so the entire chain was actually changed. So I need to make some changes. Okay. So I need to re-execute all the steps. Like, and this coming back to this third step. So it is actually built on top of these two layers, right? So obviously these intermediary images which were actually built, so they got changed. So that is the reason why like it is trying to rebuild. Is it clear?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, wow.
So that is the reason why like whenever we build these images, so we are supposed to make sure that like we are supposed to make sure that like any of these changes, like any of these commands, so they don't actually change. So for example, like if we are actually trying to copy, so there is a lengthy file which has like these npm install npm node package installs. So you know like how painful it is, like so how much time. So for large applications, like it obviously takes almost 10-15 minutes. There are some applications which take minimum of 5 minutes for just downloading these node packages. Okay, so if you actually change the order, so whenever like you're actually trying to build it in the local or somewhere, like so if you're changing the order of these commands, so obviously like it will actually increase the build time of this image. So that is the reason why like whenever we make any changes to the this image file, so you should keep this point in mind so that like the caching doesn't actually get disturbed. Okay. So unless until and unless like it is inevitable, like so it is mandatory to change a specific step. So in this case, like copying this shell startup.sh file, like in the first line or at the last line, it doesn't make much of a difference. Okay. See how much time it is actually taking. Like previously, it used to complete just in 2 seconds or 3 seconds, but now it is still running. Okay. So you can see like entire chain. So only the first step is cached. Apart from that, like everything is actually changed. So let's say like if I install, add some command like over here, like, okay, copy. Uh, so I want to copy another file. Copy which file? Okay. So I just wanted to copy this empty text file. Okay, aa.txt. So now I'm adding this particular command somewhere here, like, okay, so I'm not adding it at the front, like, so, but I'm just adding it before this Redis server installation. Copy slash dot a dot txt to the current location. I'm just copying it. And now if we execute, like, so which steps do you think like they'll be cached and which step is going to change?
First four will be cached and from fifth it will start.
Exactly. Like, yeah, first 4 steps they will be cached, but the fifth step, like, it is again going to re-execute. See, first 4 steps they are cached, and the fifth step, so it is actually after the copy, so it is again rerunning this apt install Redis server. Okay. So that is the reason why, like in the development time, so changing the order of this particular image, so we should be very careful. Like, so if you add like any steps like intermediate steps or any logging related steps in between, so you'll actually face the problem. It's not a problem actually, but you'll lose the ability of caching. So you'll lose the ability of caching. That's the main concern. Like, okay. So it's not a problem. Like you can actually copy it here or at the end, like wherever you want. But it actually loses the ability of caching. That's the only concern. So this is all about like caching and then layering. Like so, hope you are. Um, so you can actually see all these commands like they're actually built, but post this copy like they're actually built on the fly. They're not cached. And you can also see like so what is the size of like different layers, like okay, for example, like so this specific layer, like it is almost like this is 77.8 MB. After that, like it is adding all those layers, like it is adding some space size. So in Nginx it is almost adding 55 MB. Okay. So this is about like copy. So copy is nothing but like if you want to copy a specific file from your directory, from your host machine, like so the machine from which like you're building this particular image. So if you want to copy a file from there into the image, not the container. So it is you're copying it into the image. Like any files like which we copy into the image, they'll be available. They'll be available. Like okay. So for example, like if you download, so if you remember like volumes, so we are not actually copying anything, right? So you're actually doing something like a linking kind of thing, okay, between your host machine and then the Docker container. But here in this case, like you are making a physical copy, you are copying this file onto this image. And once I commit this image to Docker Hub or somewhere, like, and if you download this image, this file will be persistent, okay, in the image. Okay, so these are the commands like related to the copy one. Let's see few more commands. And another interesting thing, like I just wanted to show you is like, so the Alpine image of Alpine images. So whenever you see like any Alpine images, so Alpine images are nothing but like they are the minimal sized images. Okay. So for example, like if you take just an Ubuntu Alpine image, so it's just like 5 MB Linux distribution. Okay. So just imagine like you are running an operating system, which is of size 5 MB. Okay. So I'll just show it to you. Okay. Okay, so this is the Ubuntu, like a minimal Docker image based on Alpine Linux with a complete package index. Its size is just like 5 MB. Okay, you see that, right? So you can actually build images based on this Alpine image. So for example, like every image, like you'll have different versions, like Node. Even in the Node, like you'll have Alpine version as well as like full version. So So you can see these are all the Alpine version. So Alpine version is nothing but like, so this particular node image, it was built on top of Alpine image, okay? Linux Alpine image. So its size will be very less, okay? So let's see some of these commands like from shell entry point env. So if you want to add like any we'll see these commands like cmd shell and entry point. Now we'll see some of these commands like env. So env is nothing but like if you want to add like any environment variables like environmental variables related to this particular server or something like that. So you can actually add them. So I'll just add like env. Um, so So env must have, this is the key. Env is nothing but like, so we'll have like key value pairs, right? So in environmental variables, so we'll have all those key value pairs. So which are accessible throughout the system. So I'm just having like Pavan underscore key, and then value will be like Pavan underscore value. So let me build this container. So Docker run -it interactive mode, and I wanted to execute this command /bin/bash. Okay, so I'm inside this particular how to print.
echo చేయన్న echo space డాలా
not able to paste this. No, so echo. You can actually see echo $power. So this is the environment variable. So now if you see, like I started this container and then I'm actually inside this container, right? So inside this container, like I'm able to access this variable like dollar Pavan underscore key, and I got the value as Pavan underscore value. So one of the advantages with these environmental variables is like, so you can actually put like any env values over here, and you can access them in almost all the applications, like whether it is .NET code or Java code and all those places, like you can actually access these env values. Okay.
So in order to add Pavan's point, it is helpful while creating several environment files like staging, dev, QA. Here also in while creating Docker file, mkdir file name.txt like that, you can pass the environment value.
Yeah. So and also like connection strings or anything like so. Usually like we don't paste this connection strings, so they'll be dynamic, right? So any static values like which you think can be accessed across those applications, so you can actually put them in the env values, like okay, and then you can access in any of these applications. Every application has access to env values, like whether it is Python, .NET, or Java, like whatever it might be. Okay. So that is env. And then copy and add are almost similar. Like so copy is actually, so we did a copy, right? So the difference between the copy and add, like so they're almost like similar. Like their purpose is actually similar, but one advantage with add is something like this. So you can actually add like any so any HTTP URL. So for example, like I just wanted to add this PDF. PDF. You wanted to add this one. So I'm just adding this to this current directory. No. So you can actually see this is actually executed and this is actually executed. Let's see like if the file really exists or not. Let me go inside this container, run this and so you can actually see. So this is the sample PDF, like which is actually copied. And the difference between like copy and add commands is copy command, like you cannot actually specify any URLs, whereas with like add command, so you'll be able to specify any of these URLs. So that's the major difference between copy and add. So or else like they both act as the same thing. Okay. So the working directory right now, like when I'm actually getting inside this container docker run -it, so I'm inside this root directory or something like this, right? So if I want to get inside, like so whenever like I start this container, I wanted to get inside this Pavan directory or something like that. Okay, so there like you need to specify this working directory. Okay, so working directory in the sense like you're specifying this Docker container that like this is the base directory like which you should actually look for any code or something like that. Let's actually do the working directory. Work dir. So if you see this like previously, so whenever like I executed this command docker run -it bin bash, so I used to so the cursor, it used to be in this particular root directory. But now since I gave this working directory as like Pavan, so it is actually getting inside this Pavan directory. Okay. So ls, I do like make directory. So Pavan dir2. Okay. Oh, so this is the working directory. So the main usage of this working directory is like, for example, like if you have like any code base or anything like this. So for example, like almost all these Ubuntu images, so they'll be, I mean, the root folder would be like something like this. So this is the root directory. So it will be displaying. But let's say like are we interested in this root directory? So basically like if I log in into this container, so and this is my web application or something like that. Okay. So which directory you'll be interested in? So are you interested in this root directory, or you'd like to actually go into a specific working directory, like where your code actually present? So obviously, like whenever I start this container, so I want to see my code, right? So this is where like this working directory command, it comes into picture. Like, so you can actually just like copy this thing, like, okay. And also like once you specify this working directory, any further commands, like any copy commands, like so when you specify like dot, so instead of this it getting copied into, so I'll just show you. Okay. So instead of it getting copied into the root directory, it gets copied into the working directory. Okay. So for example, so this is my image, right? So I just added this /Pavan as my working directory. In this case, like you're able to see this Pavan directory because like Ubuntu with Nano Pavan has this directory. Okay. If this is not actually present, like you should actually make a directory and then make it as a working directory. So for example, I'll create like another directory inside this Pavan. Okay, dir. So I want to create a folder inside this Pavan as my code. Okay, so this is my code. So this is the code. This is the directory like which I created. So now I want to make this as my working directory. So work directory, and I want to specify this as my working directory. Okay. So previously, like any copy commands which I did, they got copied into a.text and all these commands, like they got copied into the root directory. But now I'll be making another copy command. I'll add something like package.json or something like. So this is a dummy one. So now I want to copy this package.json. Okay. I want to copy this. This is my file path on the host directory. Okay. So I want to copy it into the current directory. So here the current directory is nothing but the root directory. But once I set this like working directory as some other directory, so obviously like the working directory changes, like the current directory changes to this working directory. Okay. So let me rebuild this image. Okay. So let's actually run this image. So you can actually see whenever like when I started this bin bash, so the prompt like it went into this directory like my code directory, and if you see ls like you have package.json. If you do like so this is directory, like, and again like here like you can see a.txt. So these files are copied before actually setting the working directory. Okay. So usually when this actually helps, like this working directory helps is, so for example, like you have node, so you have this package.json, okay. and your code, you generally you don't want to copy the code into the root directory, right? So obviously like you'll be creating some source code directory or src directory, and that is where like you copy all your code, right? And obviously like you'll set like, so if you want to execute like npm install, so if you don't specify this working directory, what you should actually do, for example, like I copied my code into this, I'm just copying the code, something like this, like, okay, I'm copying my code. So just assume that like you don't have any of these things. So I'm copying all my code from the current directory or .s. Just assume that this is my code. So I'm copying all my code like current directory into. So I'll be creating another folder like run mkdir. So usually like these are the steps like we follow with any of these softwares like Node or any installations. mk directory /src, like I'm just creating src folder like source code folder. Okay. So I'm copying all my code like my HTML code into this src folder. Okay. So after copying all the code into the src folder, like let's assume that this has like package.json and all that stuff. This has this package.json. Okay. Now when we execute, like, so if we don't set this working directory, obviously like if you want to run any npm install or something like that, so you need to run npm install. You need to specify .src. You need to specify this path. For each and every command, like, so because your code base is in this src directory, so you want to target this src directory, right? So you need to specify this folder path or something like that. So instead of doing that, like this working directory comes into our rescue, like directory. So I'll set like .src. Okay. So now if I do like npm install or something like that, so since this is in the current context, like src directory, like npm install will obviously pick the package.json, which is present in this directory. No. So any questions?
No problem.
No problem.
You're following, right?
Yeah, I think so. Logbox also did this. I think like the logbox, you can see the folder structure, right? So in system customers, we used to have customer app, customer API. So
Exactly. Yeah.
in system customers, they have Docker file, but in to install PHP, we need to go to customer API to do that, right?
Mm.
Yeah, I understand.
So so any of these commands, like except this entry point and then the command. So all these commands, they are executed on the image itself. Like, okay. So for example, like if I do package.json over here, okay, in this image, okay. So for example, like you might be aware, like, so most of you are familiar with this package.json and then how this node packages they get installed, right? So usually like whenever you start the container, these packages, so for example, if I have like package.json installed over here, right? So if I do like npm install, so unfortunately like I don't have npm install, so we'll see that npm install and then the package.json. Yeah. So if I do like npm install, so obviously in the image itself, like you'll have all these files, like, okay, all these packages in downloaded. Okay. So one of the disadvantages with this approach, like, so if I do an npm install, like I copied this, so you can see like I copied this package.json. Let me see if I have any sample package.json. Definitely like yeah. So if I do like npm install, the drawback is like, let's say like your application has like a lot many packages, okay, and the drawback with this approach is like the image size obviously gets increased, okay. So whenever like you're doing npm install, so whenever you're at the time of building the image itself, like you're installing all these packages. Okay. The drawback with that is like, so if your node packages size is almost like, so you might be aware, like, so most of these node packages, some of these applications, they have like gigabytes of packages. Okay. Is that true, Budri?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
obviously, like all these packages, they get downloaded on the images, and then your image size, it gets blotted. Okay. So having that much, that big image size, so it's not actually recommended. Okay. So your image size should be almost always slim. So just to avoid that, like usually that is the reason why like we don't prefer to have like npm install or any of these steps like which increase the image size. Okay. So instead of that, like what we can actually do is, so you can have something like startup.js. We'll see that. Okay. So we'll see that example like tomorrow. So that is about like a working directory. Expose is nothing but like, so if you want to expose any port, so usually like, so exposing the ports, so what you can actually do is, so if you don't specify the port expose over here, but still like if you are running any softwares like Nginx or something like that, like they run on port 80, and you need to specify -p, small letter p, and then the host port and then the destination port. So that is the thing. And if you specify like expose 80 or something like that. So I know like Nginx on my container, it runs on port 80, right? So the advantage of this expose 80 is if you specify like minus capital P. So the option which we saw. So if you specify like -p, it assigns a random port. So how does it pick? Like, so I need to take like this port 80, and then so I need to assign a random port. How does it actually decide? So based on this expose port, the port which is exposed using this command. Okay. So if you don't specify this expose 80, so it is mandatory for you to provide like a minus small p and then host port and then the destination port. Okay. So this is all about like expose. Okay. And then the volume. So the volume is again like another important concept. Like, so we saw these volumes, right? So if you remember, like, so when we are actually running these Docker commands, like this -v option, so you're specifying this host directory path and then a semicolon, colon, and then the destination directory path you're just putting. So this way, like what we are actually doing, like we are building a link between like our host directory and then the destination and then the target directory in the Docker container. Okay. So if you just specify something like this, okay, so if you just specify something like a volume, volume something like vol123, okay, and then so if I build an image out of this, building this image, okay, so this is actually throwing in this because like npm is not present on this Ubuntu, right? So you need to install node and then npm. I just removed that statement. Okay, so the volume got created. So if you want to see all those volumes that are actually present, see, these are the different volumes that are actually created. Okay, some of these volumes, so these are created with my other applications like Docker applications, and you can see like, so these are the different volumes that are actually created. Okay, now let me run a container. Okay, so let me start this container which was actually built. So run -it, and then this is the image which I built, and bin bash. So now I'll do. So you should be seeing somewhere this volume. Wall. Yeah, so you can see this is the volume which was created like wall123. Okay. So let me get inside this wall123 directory. This is just like a directory ls. Okay. So how does this actually get linked? So basically, like when we are actually running this Docker run, I didn't actually specify any volume binding over here. Okay. So in my Docker file, like I just created like volume and then I just gave a name like wall123. Okay. And then so this is that we see that this is the directory like which is actually created over here. So by default, if we specify a volume, something like this, so the volume gets created on your host machine. Like, so it is actually created in your Docker. So your Docker engine, it actually maintains these volumes. Okay. So there is a specific file path where you can actually see all these volumes. So I just like took a copy of this thing. It's like WSL, like Windows Subsystem for Linux, and then Docker Desktop. So I'm using like Docker Desktop, right? So this is the Docker desktop, and then so this is the folder like community Docker, and there like I see volumes. So let me actually show you the volume. So these are the different folders you see, right? All these volumes. So when I executed this volumes, so you see these are the folders, right? 2E, 4A, and all these items. Okay. So let me actually create a folder over here, file over here. So yeah. .txt. Okay. So I created this file right on the server. Like let's see like where exactly this. So this is not the one. So this is related to the RabbitMQ.
Or else we can,
Yeah, we
yeah,
can
we
do
can
like
say
Docker
Docker
inspect.
inspect,
Yeah,
Docker inspect the container name.
container name. So you can
Utils.
actually look into that. So this is the volume. Like so you can actually see this is just like the volume command like -v option. But here like we are explicitly specifying like which directory like you want your host directory, and then the target directory you're actually specifying. But in this case, so it is something like, so it actually takes care like the volume is actually taken care by the engine itself, like okay, for persisting any data. uh, so let me do this. So Docker inspect. So Docker inspect, and then I wanted to, so Docker, yes. So it got exited. Okay. So I wanted to. Uh, let's select Docker TS. Ins- So you can actually see the volumes somewhere here. Okay. So this is all the network related stuff. And then, so your environment variables, like which you define. So these are the environmental variables. And then you can see this is the volume 1, 2, 3. So you can actually see this is the volume. The source is something like this. So this is the source, and then the destination is volume 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. So this is actually the Ubuntu Linux part. Okay. So usually like it when it is actually translating it to your, so the Docker on Windows, so it acts like bit weird. So basically there is a Linux Windows subsystems, Windows subsystem shell for Linux. Okay. And then so you cannot actually directly identify this. So that's the reason why like I opting out of this. So this is the path like okay. So you need to translate it to this like these volumes. And then the volume ID is 57B6A3. So 57B6A3. Okay. So each and every time, like when I'm actually building this image, so it is actually creating a different volume, right? So now let's see a small example. Okay. So let me actually create. So I'm inside this container, right? .txt. So I just created this file. So you should see a.txt file. Okay. So this is the volume like which I have. So now let me actually create another container out of it. So you're following me, right? Or any confusion? Like, am I going fast or anything like that? Okay. So you see, like, so whenever like I created another container, so this container, even though the volume is actually same, it is actually creating a different volume. Okay. I mean, so the volume name is same, like volume 123. This is the destination directory on the container, target directory on the container. But it actually, so this container, it will have like its own volume. Okay. So if you want to check this volume after PS, this is my new container name. So this is the new, this is the volume like E70A. Okay. E70, and this is the volume like, okay. So it has like no data. Okay, so this is about like volume. So then what is the advantage of having these volumes? So there is a small slight advantage with these volumes. So it is something like you can actually attach a volume. So for example, uh, so if I want to attach like a volume created on one container, like, okay. So for example, I'll keep this container. So obviously like this particular volume, it gets deleted. It is not actually deleted. Like sometimes we are supposed to manually clean these volumes. So Docker prune volumes, that is the command. So if we wanted to attach like any of these volumes, so for example, like this is the volume like which I gave, right? So Docker volume ls whenever we do. So this container, this running container, so it is actually making use of this E7DA, I think, like, is that the one? 57B8 or something. So this is the name, like volume name. Okay, so this is not like a human readable format, right? So this is not in human readable format, but you can actually create volumes, like, so something like Docker create volume, and then you can specify like something like Pavan underscore VOL. sorry, like, so it is vice versa. Docker volume create one underscore VOL. Okay. So you can see like this is the volume. Like, so I'll just demo it to you. Like, so tomorrow, like I'll show you like how can we actually create, you make use of this container. Like, so let's say like you have multiple images and all of these images, like they wanted to access the same volume. Okay. So in that case, like it's a simple thing. Like, so you need to specify docker run -it. So previously, like we used to specify the host directory, right? Our host directory. So instead of that, like you can simply specify this Pavan underscore VOL. Okay. And then this is the target directory. That's it. Like, so if you are running like multiple containers, then you can simply specify this volume name, and all of these containers, they make use of this volume. Like it's like common path for all of them. So these scenarios, like we'll mostly use this in databases. So for example, like if there are like multiple copies of I mean multiple replicas of a database which are actually running, like, so for example like Kafka or Redis, so you can actually have like multiple replicas. So what we actually do is like, so we provide this shared volume, and what these replicas, each replica is nothing but like each node of this Kafka instance or Redis instance, they try to write to the same volume or the same directory. Okay. So that is all about this volumes. So user, like if you want to create any users or something like this, I never got a chance to use this on build and then stop signal, like health check labels. So some of these are most recently added, but I'll just explain it to you like tomorrow. Okay. So the label is again like something like this. So if you want to label this particular image, so you can just provide this label. Okay. So we'll also see this label like tomorrow. So among these, like the most important ones are like run, CMD, entry point, and then env, like we sometimes use this, copy and add this working directory, expose volumes, okay, and arguments to some extent. So these are like some of the most recently added ones. Like stop signal is nothing but like, so whenever like you receive a stop signal, so we use this Docker stop container name, right? So when you issue the Docker stop, so if you want to execute like any specific shell script or any specific code, like, so when the container is getting stopped, so if you want to execute like a shell script or something like that, so then this stop signal, it comes into picture. Like on build is also something similar. Like, so once this is actually the image is built, so if you want to execute any specific shell scripts or something like that, then we can actually use this on build. Okay. So any questions on this? The Docker file.
So I have a question regarding the volumes. So in the Docker file, we gave command like volume, some random name. So this is creating a directory in the Docker image, right? So can we not point some local directory here for the volume to be created instead of creating it in so the volumes are getting created in some different path in the Windows, right? So can
So
we not?
yeah, so that is yeah. Here, like you cannot actually do that. That is because, so this Docker file, it is not specific to a specific machine, right? So for example, like if you specify this volume current directory, if I want to specify this as my current volume, okay. So it is just like a name, and then the volume is actually decided by the Docker engine. Okay. So for example, like if you specify something like this directory, so I want to have this my HTML folder as a volume. Okay. So in another machine, this directory might not exist, right? So in that case, like if you want to go with that approach, you have this -v option, Docker -v. Okay. So this is just to bind between the Docker engine volumes and then this information.
Okay.
So let's actually try to see this volume. So for example, my HTML. Okay. So usually like that is not. um, Where is this volume? Going for this. So did we copy this minus two?
అన్న ఉంది చూడండి మౌంట్ తర్వాత ఉంది my HTML.
Oh no, the my HTML. So I copied this directory, right? So my HTML. Let's see. I'll create another file over here. This my HTML, like, so this is not actually bound to this location. Okay. So this directory, like, it is not actually bound. So it is just taking this thing. Like, so let's assume, let's actually look at this directory. So we can inspect this volume. Inspect. So you can see, like, this is a source directory again. Like, so this is actually just a name with folder name that is getting created on the container. Okay. So here, like, I created two volumes. One is volume 123 and then my HTML. Okay. So they're again pointing to this directory. So usually, like, we don't mount these volumes using this directory, like Docker image file. So this is because, so usually, like, the file path might actually change. So in my case, so this is actually, so if I'm just specifying, like, only it should be some directory, like, okay. So something like my HTML directory on my host machine. So the same directory might not exist on someone else's image, right? Okay. So usually, like, that is the reason why, like, we can't actually specify these volumes. Like, so you cannot specify the host directory on the volume. So it's just like, so when you specify this my HTML, it is just saying, like, so I'll be creating like a volume 123, and which is actually, and the host machine folder is actually maintained by the Docker engine. Okay.
Okay.
We'll also see the documentation. All these are the options, like, so to have these volumes, like, okay, using this command line argument. So with these volumes, like, you can also have something like NFS volumes, NFS server or file system servers you'll have, right? Or this Samba volumes or AWS volumes or something like that. Okay, storage, you'll have like AWS storage, right? You can also have them.
S3 bucket.
Yeah, not S3 bucket. I never tried, but AWS
But
you can actually create like storage.
yeah, usually we are not doing like that. We are
Yeah.
doing separate volumes and then we will copy into that.
Exactly. Like, so you'll have like a storage volumes, like storages which are actually specific to this cloud providers, and then we can mount those volumes. Okay. So any other questions?
No, Pavan. So I want to just add one point to your sharing of your knowledge. So comparing to copy and add, the main difference in add is like in Windows world when you are trying to zip a folder, right? In zip you have two files. Let's say a.txt and 3a.txt. In Ubuntu world you created the tar file. So by using add command, directly you can extract to the destination rather than the, so here the add command will do two steps. One is extracting the files into the destination location. So that is the main difference that I observed between the copy and add. Hello.
Karthik, you are able, I'm able to hear you. I think
Okay.
Pawan.
I'm able to.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Pavan might be disconnected. Okay. So I will share the Docker file related to add example. And moreover, coming to add, it's non-advisable to use the URL path. Better we can use curl. Okay.